Since cutting the Fed funds rate is off the table because we're at about zero, is anybody anxiously awaiting what the Fed has to say tomorrow after its two-day meeting? We've got somebody who's very interested. Joining us now exclusively from Reno, Nevada is Gerald O'Driscoll, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute and former Vice President of the Dallas Fed. Good to see you, Jerry. Nice to have you on.
Nice to be on, Liz.
Well, let's get right to it. What do you think will be interesting and of note coming out of this meeting? If we don't really care what's going on with rates, we know they're effectively at zero.
Well, it's all going to be about the wording. I think they're going to be spending a lot of the time on what they call their communication strategy, which is how do they explain to the markets what they're doing. And also, I imagine over this two-day period, there's going to be a lot of internal discussions on how they extricate themselves from all this liquidity, the low interest rates, and all these assets they bought, looking out to a year and into next year.
You seem very concerned with inflation versus deflation, meaning at some point inflation, higher prices may risk overtaking the markets. What would you be looking for, and do you think the Fed has a plan to deal with that if it does eventually come to pass?
I don't know if they have a plan. If you read the speech Bernanke gave in London, he goes into this, but it's not really a plan. It's more, I guess, in the category of hope. So I'm hoping that there's some strategizing going on at this two-day meeting.
What do you think the government should do to address all of the illiquid assets? And I'm talking about those level 3 assets of banks. There's so much talk now of reviving the bad bank idea, of taking all of those off banks' balance sheets, putting them somewhere else. And then what do you do with them? Do you like this idea?
There's no good ideas out there. All of them have drawbacks, but it is something that ought to be considered because you want those bad assets managed and not distracting the management of the so-called good bank.
Sure. That
has to rebuild that bank and turn it back into a good, solid financial institution. So there is merit to the bad bank concept, but where's the talent to manage all those assets, and nobody knows how to price them.
And I'm looking at a bank that would be created that has all of these assets on them, and then it sits there at the taxpayer's expense. Do you believe when you hear, say, for example, former Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson saying, hey, the taxpayer actually may come out on top with this thing if they are priced properly and are able to sell them off? Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe that. It would be wonderful, but I think all solutions are going to involve a hit to the taxpayer.
We know now that as we look at the whole system and what's going on here, you talk about, do they have a plan of dealing with the eventuality of getting all of the liquidity, meaning the money that they've printed and the low interest rates to turn around? What would take it for them to turn interest rates to the upside and start hiking rates? I know that's a long way off, but what do you think?
Yeah, okay, it's a long way off. We're not talking about the immediate term, but a sharp acceleration in inflation, that would force the Fed's hand.
Do you see that coming within the next year, 2009?
Probably not within 2009, no.
Do you like Tim Geithner? Let me throw that out to you.
Do I like Tim Geithner?
Do you think he's doing the right thing right now?
Well, he's a very sharp fellow. Let's stipulate that. But he was, president of the New York Fed, and he was in charge of regulating all these institutions that got deeply into trouble. And, I guess you could say he's learned a lot of lessons, but his performance in that job was not the best.
Well, yeah, do we really want people learning lessons right now when everybody's money is at stake? Jerry, so good to have you. Thank you very much for coming on Fox Business.
Thanks, Liz, for having me.
Gerald O'Driscoll is with the Cato Institute. Of course, he's a former vice president of the Dallas Fed. He's seen how they make the sausage in the past.